Hello and welcome back to Nutrition Coaching and Life. My name is Lisa. I'm your host. I'm the owner and head coach at Nutrition Coaching and Life, where we help people lose body fat, gain muscle, improve their body composition, and their relationship with food. This is another research recap where I read from my favorite research review titled Body by Science. This is Bill Campbell's research review. There are plenty of great research reviews out there, such as REPS, such as Alan Aragon's research review, such as Mass, but Body by Science is by far my favorite. I have no affiliation with it, but I can highly recommend it because I think that Bill just does such a fantastic job at summarizing very complex things in a manner that's very easy to understand for coaches, but also for anybody who's just interested in improving their body composition. Today's topic is let me review. Today's topic is taking a 10-week break from resistance training, how much muscle is lost. This is from the February issue, and the actual study that was reviewed is titled, Does Taking a Break Matter? Adaptations in Muscle Strength and Size Between Continuous and Periodic Resistance Training. And that's from a study by Halonen et al. In 2024. So very recent. And I think this is a super interesting topic because, who hasn't had to take a break for work reasons, travel reasons, injury reasons, and sort of like freaked out maybe a little bit about, oh, am I losing all my gains or not? Does it matter? And also, if we're taking deloads, does that like breaks from training intentionally? Does that really yield a positive adaptation or not? So I'm excited to get into it. Before I do, if you enjoy this channel, this content, please do me a favor and subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment if you have any particular topics that you would like me to cover in the future. I'm linking the research review, I'm linking the original article reviewed, and of course I'm also linking our Instagram page where I try to provide even more free valuable content, hopefully, as well as our website where you can get in touch if you're interested in nutrition coaching. Okay, let us go ahead and get started. Giving you a little bit of background information, we know that building muscle takes time, often a lot of time, especially the more advanced we get, the slower it sort of tends to be. We sweat out multiple resistance training workouts each week for an entire year, and then because of a flat tire or some other annoying life circumstance, we are forced to miss a workout. It's only one workout, so we probably don't stress about it too much. But what happens when we're forced to miss several workouts? What if life dictated that we could not work out for 2 months or more? I know the thoughts that would follow. I haven't worked out in 2 months. I've lost almost all of my muscle and shriveled into a shell of my former self. Ugh. Um, Nowadays, I don't stress about missing a workout or two, but when I have not lifted weights for several months at a time, I wonder if I'm losing muscle, and if so, how much am I losing? We have some prior research on this topic to inform our opinions. One of the best studies was published in 2013 and included non-resistance trained males. Uh, this was a really good study because of its length. It was actually 24 weeks in length. The researchers split the subjects into two resistance training groups. They had a continuous group. This group trained continuously for 6 months straight, never taking any breaks or time off from training. And they had a detraining group. This group took 2 3-week detraining periods over the 6 months of training. As we look at the study design, and we can note that the continuous group trained for the entire 24 weeks of the study, obviously, while the detraining group trained for 18 out of the 24 weeks. During the study, both groups performed supervised bench press training 3 days per week. Since the bench press stimulates the chest muscle, this is what the researchers assessed for the muscle growth. They measured the cross-sectional area of the chest using an MRI. So what did this 24 detraining study teach us? Did incorporating detraining phases cause a loss of muscle mass after 6 months of training? No. Both groups increased their chest muscle mass by nearly the same amount. The main lesson from the study is that in untrained males taking 2 complete 3-week breaks from training after training for 6 consecutive weeks results in the same amount of total muscle mass gained as compared to never taking a break from the training program. We have 2 other key points that we want to focus on with this and all detraining studies. What happens to muscle mass during the detraining period and what happens in the first few weeks of resuming the training? As we can see in this particular study, there's a definite loss of muscle mass during the 3-week detraining period. If we were only to focus on the detraining periods, we'd be convinced that taking time off from training is a horrible decision, but this would also be a short-sighted way to look at this. We already know that taking time off did not impact muscle hypertrophy over the long term. We also need to look at what happens after the detraining phases. So when we were comparing the gains in muscle mass between the continuous group and the detraining group in the weeks following the detraining, we see a huge difference. The rate of muscle growth was much greater in the detraining group in the weeks following the time off from training. This was an excellent study on which to base our initial opinions concerning taking time off from training. However, we need to acknowledge that this study was conducted in males only and that they were beginners. In the study that we're reviewing today, the investigation still only included non-resistance trained subjects, but this new study included females. So let's dig into the latest study and see if it supports the findings of the earlier research or if it reported conflicting outcomes. Just a quick note on terminology. So taking a break versus detraining versus deloads. We're defining the term detraining as a period of time when you don't do any resistance training. The prefix de means reduce or to remove. So a detraining phase can be planned time off from all resistance training activities, or it can be employed via a systematic reduction in training intensity, volume, or both. Another term that's sometimes used to describe detraining is deload. Detraining and deloads are intended to provide a recuperation period before starting training again. In summary, while some people refer to detraining or a deload as a time off reduced training volume, in this research study that we're about to review, the term detraining and deload means a complete cessation of resistance training activities for a period of time. So who was in the study? We had 42 males and females who were not previously resistance training or engaging in systematic endurance type training. This was defined as performing less than 10 resistance training sessions in the past year and doing less than 2 endurance exercise sessions lasting less than 30 minutes per week for the past 6 months. Other inclusion criteria included that the subjects had to be between 18 and 40 years old and have a BMI of between 18.5 and 19, and 30. So that means not being classified as obese. What did the researchers do? The researchers' primary goal was to compare the effects of a 20-week continuous resistance training period to 2 10-week resistance training periods separated by a 10-week detraining period to determine the impact on muscle hypertrophy and maximal strength. The investigators designed a high-quality study to answer this question. The study was a randomized parallel group design, meaning there were 2 groups in the design and the subjects were randomly assigned to each group. The 2 groups of the subjects in the study were a continuous group and a detraining group. The total study length was 30 weeks. During the 30-week study, all subjects completed 20 weeks of resistance training, and the way that the researchers investigated the effects of a detraining period was the manner in which they had the subjects complete the 20 weeks of training. So the continuous group did not do any resistance training for the first 10 weeks of the study. That way, when they started their resistance training program, they were able to do resistance training for 20 consecutive weeks without interruption, hence the name continuous group. The detraining group started the 30-week study with resistance training for 10 weeks. Then they took a 10-week break, so the detraining portion of the study, and then they resumed the resistance training for the final 10 weeks of the study. During the 10-week deload, the researchers instructed the subjects to resume their normal lifestyles, but to avoid any type of resistance training or endurance type training as well. So we can notice from that both groups performed 20 total weeks of resistance training. Obviously, the only difference is where the non-training occurred within the two groups. Since the continuous group started their intervention with no training for the first 10 weeks, their training break did not serve as a deload, since they were not deloading from any previous training. In contrast, the detraining group took 10 weeks off from resistance training after already lifting for 10 weeks, and then their 10-week break served as a true deload. Now, let's look at the resistance training program. So both groups underwent two identical 10-week resistance training periods, but the only difference between the groups was that the continuous group performed the first and the second 10-week resistance training periods continuously, and the detraining group had a 10-week detraining period between the resistance training periods. The resistance training program consisted of 2 whole body workouts per week with at least 48 hours of rest between the sessions. The 5 exercises in the workout included leg press, knee extension, bench press, barbell biceps curl, and a seated row. The measures of muscle hypertrophy were conducted on the quadriceps and the biceps. The total lifting volume at the workout provided was 16 total weekly sets for the quadriceps and 16 total weekly sets for the biceps. What physique-related variables, outcome variables were measured? The researchers measured muscle size changes via B-mode axial plan ultrasound, a very good and common way to measure muscle thickness and to determine if muscle hypertrophy or atrophy is occurring. And 2 different muscles were monitored for muscle size changes: an upper body muscle, so biceps, and the lower body muscle, vastus lateralis, in one of the quadriceps muscles. Muscle ultrasound measures were taken every 5 weeks during the 30-week intervention. In addition to muscle gain and muscle loss, the researchers also assessed maximal strength in the lower body via leg press and upper body via biceps curl. So what were the results? As we look at the study's results, we focus on what happens to muscle mass and strength if we take a long deload from training. In this case, we want to know how much muscle is lost after taking a 10-week break. But this is not the only data the study focuses on or provided us with. We also want to know if upon resuming training, do we gain back any lost muscle quickly? And finally, even if we lose muscle after taking some time off, doesn't matter over the long term. Let's just note here that while both the quadriceps and the biceps muscle were measured in the study, we'll only be highlighting the biceps muscle for the sake of efficiency. However, the hypertrophy changes in the vastus lateralis were nearly identical to the changes that took place in the biceps muscle. So, muscle mass. We're going to break down the study's results into 3 different areas presented as 3 different questions. Number 1, did incorporating a deload or detraining period cause a loss of muscle mass after 20 weeks of training compared to never taking a break? Number 2, what happens to muscle mass during a 10-week detraining period? And number 3, what happens to muscle mass during the retraining period, so the weeks of training immediately following the detraining phase? Going back to question number 1, did incorporating a detraining or detraining period or deload period cause a loss of muscle mass after 20 weeks of training compared to never taking a break? To answer this question, let's look at the amount of muscle gain that took place at the end of the study. As the data indicates, both training groups increased their muscle mass by approximately the same amount, around 25%, while the continuous group did gain a little more muscle, about 1.5% more. This slight difference was not statistically significant. The data tells us that training for 10 weeks, then taking a 10-week break from training, and then resuming training for an additional 10 weeks results in the same amount of overall muscle growth when training for 20 weeks consecutively. Second question, how much muscle is lost during a 10-week detraining period? It is clear that taking a long elongated deload results in a loss of muscle mass. How much muscle mass was lost? Well, the subjects lost about half, so 46% of their gains during the 10-week detraining period. If the study ended here, we would be compelled to conclude that we should never take a break from resistance training. However, that is not how we should look at this data since the training program resumed. And this is how real life works as well. We train for a while and then at times we take a break from training for a certain amount of time and then resume again, hopefully anyway. So question number 3, what happened to muscle mass during the retraining period, so the weeks of training after the detraining phase? When comparing the gains in muscle mass between the continuous and the detraining groups during the final 10 weeks of training, we can see quite a difference in the rates at which muscle was built. Remember, the final 10 weeks of training for the continuous group occurred immediately following the 10 weeks of prior resistance training. In comparison, the final 10 weeks of training for the detraining group took place after a 10-week break from training. So the detraining group gained muscle at a rate that was more than 2 times the rate of the continuous group, 15% versus 6.5%, and this difference was statistically significant. Another way to view this data is to notice the drop off in the rate of muscle hypertrophy for the continuous group from the first to the second 10-week training period. During the first 10 weeks of training, they gained 19% more muscle in their biceps, but during the next 10 weeks of training, they only gained 6.5% more muscle. So in contrast, the detraining group was able to sustain their rates of muscle growth from the first 10 weeks of training and the second 10 weeks of training. During the first 10 weeks of training, they gained 17% more muscle mass in their biceps, and during the next 10 weeks of training, they gained 15% more muscle mass. So how should we interpret this data? First, we must ensure that we don't go too far into the weeds and overinterpret specific aspects of the study. We must remember that after 20 total weeks of resistance training, there were no differences in total muscle mass gained. In essence, it did not matter over the long term if a detraining break was implemented or not for overall muscle growth. If a break from resistance training is implemented, this study informs us that muscle mass will be lost during the detraining phase. However, when resuming training after the detraining phase, our muscles become more sensitive to the anabolic stimulus and the training and will respond more favorably to resuming training, such that any lost muscle mass is made up for when resuming training again. In summary, taking a break from resistance training does not deter longer-term gains in muscle mass. Let's look at muscle strength. The same results were observed with respect to maximal strength. Taking a break from training did not have a negative effect on the long-term strength gains in the leg press and bicep curl exercises. Looking at statements from the authors of this study. In this study, we showed that 10 weeks of detraining did not compromise resistance training adaptations in hypertrophy and maximal strength. When periodic resistance training was compared to an equal amount of continuous resistance training in young untrained males and females. This is explained by our observation that muscle strength and size lost during the detraining were rapidly regained, especially during the first weeks of retraining. Our results therefore suggest that trainees should not be too concerned about occasional short-term training breaks in their daily lives when it comes to lifelong strength training. We want to also look at some strengths and limitations of this study. So first of all, regarding the strengths. One of them was the study population. This was the first study investigating detraining that included females. Prior to the study, we could only extrapolate this data that was conducted in males and assume that the same outcomes would apply to females. With this study's publication, we do not need to make any assumptions. We rely on the published data that now includes males and females. Another strength was that the workouts were supervised. So all of the workouts in this study were conducted at the research laboratory and were supervised by research staff. Supervising the workouts drastically improves the quality of any resistance training study. When the workouts are supervised, subjects do not skip as many workouts and they work out harder and use better form in the exercises. Now, looking at the assessment of muscle hypertrophy, that was another strength. So increases in muscle size were assessed via B-mode ultrasound. This is a valid and reliable device to measure changes in muscle thickness over time, and besides MRI is the next best mode to assess muscle hypertrophy. Muscle hypertrophy measurements were taken by the same trained technician and were performed at least 48 hours after the last training session. This is good practice, so to wait for 48 hours after the last workout. Because water can pool in the muscle and cause swelling that is not actually due to muscle protein accretion or muscle hypertrophy. There were also a couple of limitations. So, for example, no nutrition controls or reporting of protein intakes. For any study implementing resistance training program and measuring muscle hypertrophy, there should be, at minimum, a recording of the protein intake and total calorie intake. In addition, there should be a standardized protein intake for all study subjects to make sure that one group of subjects was not consuming more protein than another group. Unfortunately, this study did not do either of these things. The researchers in the study did not put forth any effort to determine total calorie intake or protein consumption. The second sort of limitation of the study was that it was just in an untrained population. So while the researchers should be applauded for including females, the study was similar to the already existing data on this topic in that the subjects were not resistance trained. In the future, we need to conduct a high quality study like this, but investigate the outcomes in a resistance trained population as well, ideally. So my question to you, and also that Bill is posing here, is what are our thoughts and considerations for prescribing deloads or training breaks for our clients? I will say that I personally don't prescribe them most of the time because I think they often, or they tend to happen naturally at least 2, 3 times per year. You go on vacation, again, you have a Christmas break coming up where you don't have access to the gym, busy with work, whatever it might be. So for most of my clients who are just general population and on average, it's not really warranted to do so. However, every now and then, or with my nutrition clients with whom we also measure um, biofeedback in the sense of fatigue, in the sense of motivation for training, and so on. Quite often it happens that they're like, oh, I've got so much going on at work. I don't have this and that. I feel really depleted. I can't lift the same amount of weights, or I just really don't like it stresses me out at the moment. I have no issue of saying, hey, let's just take it easy this week and maybe just go for some walks. I am a big fan of still getting in some kind of movement, simply because I also feel like it helps with mental health, with emotional health, and it is some form of meditation or it is self-care, which I don't think we should let go of completely for the sake of busy life, because then we are even less able to handle life stress. But when it comes to strategic strength training, I have no issue with them ditching it for a little bit. And most of the time they come back stronger, or they come back and are more motivated and then able to lift more and therefore gaining more muscle or more strength again. I will admit that I personally haven't taken a really long deload, like a 10-week break, since probably like 2018, where I was sort of forced through injury. But that is because, yeah, I love it. For me, life hasn't thrown me those kind of curveball balls where I've had to completely stop strength training for such a long period of time. Even during the pandemic, I was able to do dumbbell, kettlebell, banded workouts, or, calisthenic type of workouts or so. So I never took time off completely. But yeah, anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear your experiences. Maybe you have been forced to hit the pause button for a while, also for work, for study, for injury reasons, family reasons, whatever it might be. I would love to hear. So please leave me a comment if you want to share. And aside from that, just the reminder to please hit the like button, to subscribe, or to let me know any future topic recommendations. And I'm just very grateful for you listening. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a wonderful rest of your day.